Good morning. This is part 3 of our discussion on suffering. We have talked about the definition of suffering. We did a little intro into that, and I asked you a question about a multiple choice question about how you view suffering. And so I hope you had thought about that, and perhaps your viewpoint on that might change a little bit as we start thinking about why we need to view suffering through the lens of the Bible, because God spent a lot of time talking about suffering to prepare us for it and to give us encouragement and hope through it. So it's very important that we look at this not so much fun topic. Last time we talked about some reasons why we suffer. And one of the first one that we talked about was that this is just a fallen, broken world with fallen, broken people in it. So we suffer because of that. We also suffer because we sin, and there's consequences to that sin. And then we also talked about the fact that we have an enemy, and that enemy wants to devour us. So we have suffering because of that. And then finally, we talked about last time how we suffer because Jesus suffered. Because this world, he, in his own words, hates him. And because we are his followers, it is highly likely that we will fall into that category as well. So we talked about that in part 2. So I just want to finish up the conversation of why we suffer with this. John 16:33, Jesus says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. You will have suffering in this world, but be courageous. I have conquered the world. So Jesus himself tells us that we will suffer, that is going to be something we experience in this lifetime. So the bad news is, I will suffer. There's no getting around that. But Jesus, isn't that wonderful? Jesus conquered the world. He has conquered death. He has conquered sin. And so when we give our hearts and our lives to him, we turn over to him our life, we have peace in the chaos that's all around us every day, because God is in the business of creating good out of evil. So there is good news. While yes, I am going to suffer, the good news is that God makes things new. So let's look at a couple of ways today that he does that he makes things new. First of all, he makes something new in me. There was a quote in the Bible study that we're currently doing on Wednesday nights right now, and it's from Lisa TerKeurst's new book that's titled Forgiving What You Can't Forget. And this is the quote. The greatest hell a human can experience here on earth is not suffering. It's feeling like the suffering is pointless and will never get any better. It does not have to be pointless, and it will get better. But we have to allow God to do the work through our pain that brings about something new in each one of us. And the new thing that he wants to do the very most in every situation is to draw us closer to him. Psalm 119. If you've ever looked at that psalm, you may have noticed, boy, that is a really long chapter. It is the longest chapter in the Bible. And isn't it appropriate that the longest chapter in the Bible talks about how wonderful God's word is? So Psalms 119 is about delighting in God's word and his ways. And in verses 67 through 72, this is what the psalmist says. Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I keep your word. you are good, and you do what is good. Teach me your statutes. The arrogant have smeared me with lies, but I obey your precepts with all my heart. Their hearts are hard and insensitive, but I delight in your instruction. It was good for me to be afflicted, so that I could learn your statutes. Instruction from your lips is better for me than thousands of gold and silver pieces. So in these verses, first of all, the psalmist talks about being afflicted or having suffering because he went astray, because of something he caused himself, a sin that he caused. Then he also talks about some suffering being brought upon him by other people, things that were not of his own doing at all, but how he continued, even in that suffering, to follow God and follow his ways. It even ends with him saying, it was good for me to be afflicted so that I could learn your statutes. What an amazing place to be at in your spirit, in your heart, to be able to say, it is good that I went through that, because now my relationship with God is so much closer. Now I understand better how to rely on him. You know, the older we get, the more we look back on our past, when we can see the things, the seasons that God has brought us through. And then when we come to another season of suffering, we can look back on those and we can hang on to them like an anchor, so that we don't get washed away in the current of our circumstances. We can hang on to that and remember where God brought us before, and know that he will bring us again. To be able to say, it was good for me to be afflicted. So sometimes, well, I can't think of an instance when I have suffered that when I allowed God to work in me and through me, that it didn't bring me closer to him. So know that one of the things that God makes new through your suffering is that he brings you closer to him. So next time we'll talk about some other ways that God makes things new through our suffering. Y'all have a great day.